So the introduction and the conclusion should say the same thing as each other, and they should both convey the key points in your argument. At the very least, we should be able to find your argument in the introduction and the conclusion. Often in these essays, in a sort of average to good essay, then probably what we might find is that the argument will be explained in the conclusion only. The argument will be implied through the rest of the essay, but it'll only really be explained in a sentence in the conclusion. In better essays, slightly better essays, it might be hinted at in the introduction and then developed further. And so by the time you get to the conclusion, you've figured it out. But in the best essays, it'll be consistent right the way through the essay. So the introduction, the conclusion will both say the same thing, and the same points will be made throughout the essay. Now, an argument is really just an answer to the question. But there are good arguments and weaker arguments. There are stronger arguments and weaker arguments. Stronger arguments are probably more nuanced arguments. They're more subtle, they're more sophisticated. So the arguments that we've been talking about today are good, strong, nuanced arguments. And if you think about those three C's, the categories, chronology and contingency, they're going to lead you to strong arguments, okay? And by strong arguments, I mean good quality, high quality arguments. So let's just have a look. Let's come back to that. The second thing that we're looking for in an argument is that it's well explained. And one of the key components there is that it's consistently explained. So as I said, some people only do it in the conclusion, but some people actually change their minds through the essay. So they'll argue one thing at one point and then they'll actually contradict themselves later on. So that's not obviously a good thing to try to do. So we're looking for consistency. We're looking for it to be explained in more than one place throughout the essay. And we're looking for some nuance or some sophistication. So we talked right at the beginning of this process when we planned the essay about nuance, and you're all writing nuanced arguments because of the way that you've planned it. But let's look at consistency. So the introduction starts, Stalin created his economic policies based on his two equally important goals. So the introduction says that these two goals, the ones mentioned in the question, are equally important. Does the conclusion say the same thing? It doesn't use exactly the same language, but it does say it's not true that ideology was more important. Stalin always considered both. So there's consistency there. Second thing, in the introduction, it says, makes the point that practical considerations were more important in the short term. Do we find that same argument reappearing in the conclusion? It says, however, in the short term, Soviet backwardness was the more pressing problem, and thus in the short term, practical considerations were more important. Does that echo what the introduction said? It does. So that, I would say, is an example of, well, we haven't got the essay in the middle, obviously, because it hasn't been written yet, but we've got the argument being formed. We've got it being explained in the introduction and in the conclusion. It's consistent in both. It's using the same language. It's not a copy and paste, but it is consistent in that case. Is it strong in the sense that it's nuanced? I think it is, because it's making a point about the statement that Cambridge gave you, and it's saying it's not true to say this. However, I'm going to provide you with a more accurate version of the statement that you gave me. So that's what we're looking for there with conclusions and arguments. Any questions? Okay.